So how
Yeah,
was your week?
well, it's good. So my grandmother, she finally passed away this week, as we discussed. As we talked about it, she
She was
uh,
105, you said?
she would have been 105 in October. Yeah, she was
That's
104.
amazing.
Yeah,
I was thinking about that this morning about your grandmother and how old she was when she passed. And the thing I thought about was in 19 she was born around 1915, right? And
yeah,
so
it
she
is.
lived from the silent era when there was no such thing as sound
Yeah,
to the present era where there's streaming services everywhere.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Obviously,
I didn't realize they didn't have sound back in the 1915.
oh no, and everybody had a sign language. Everything, we didn't have vocal cords until
I
20.
I just thought people carried placards around.
Yeah, we were a very non-vocal species until very recently. So it's proof because of the movies. It shows that we didn't
Yeah,
talk.
no, Charlie
So,
Chaplin. I was like, and then he
nope.
kind of learned how to speak. He learned how to
We
use
evolved.
sound pretty quickly.
We evolved very quickly. Yeah, it was weird. We evolved very, very fast. Hey, anyways, we should probably get this going here. People don't want to hear about death, I don't think. So let's, instead of
Oh,
talking about death, Dan, what are we talking about this week?
well, Joda, given what happened with your grandmother this week, and the Queen Elizabeth, I think it's actually appropriate that we talk about death and
Ah!
organizational leadership. I
Okay.
know it's everybody's favorite topic: death, death, death.
Yes.
I don't know. Maybe we'll make it some more teenagers listening because teenagers like death.
Should we have like a Scandinavian death metal intro to this show
Oh
then?
yeah, it
Let's
could
have
be, or maybe more of an Igmar Bergman. We could do this whole episode in black and white. That can
Yeah.
like
I like that. Oh
uh,
yeah, I think I got a mask here
the seventh
somewhere.
seal type thing. We could play chess.
Yeah.
With
Well, who knows?
the
I mean, we'll be like people will the audience will know what we've done in post production because we haven't done post production yet. So we'll see what we do here. So
yeah. We'll throw some Igmar Bergman in there because we Joda knows how much you like Igmar.
yeah, I love Ingvar, but that's a different discussion. Yes. Anyways, this being our 100th show, I'm sorry, not our 100th. I think was our 9th show, maybe 10th show.
I have no idea
I just
who's
wanted,
counting except our one listener.
yes, and thank
Anyways, we
you,
are going to talk
thank
about
you.
death.
Yes,
Yes, thank you. You're keeping us from dying.
yes, you're paying our rent. This is amazing. I don't even know how you're doing it.
I don't know. We don't even have a Patreon, but yeah.
Yeah,
So we're going to talk about death today, and death makes people a little bit giddy because it's sometimes an uncomfortable topic. It's something that we don't talk about a lot in our lives. When was the last time you seen a hearse around on the street? We kind of mask those vehicles that transport bodies. We kind of sanitize the whole death experience in our culture. But it's actually a really important topic, especially for organizational leaders, because it's something that you don't get trained on when you're coming up through the management ranks. You're doing all your professional development, or you're pursuing a degree in management. They don't have like death 101. How do you manage death? So that's what this podcast is going to be about today, and we're going to talk about in the first section just generally how death can impact the workplace and what you can do to address situations where a colleague or an employee may die, and how what is your role as a leader to manage that situation. And the second section of this episode, we're going to talk about terror management theory, which is one of my most beloved theories. I love it because of the existential quality of terror management theory, and it brings social science into it. So we're going to talk about that and talk about it as a framework that leaders can use to make sense of how they should approach death, in many different forms within their organization. And that brings us to the third section of this podcast episode, which is going to talk about death within organizations, but not with people, but within programs and departments and other types of organizational death, and how as leaders we can manage those situations better. So how does that sound, Joda?
can I come back next week and join a different conversation? I guess not.
Yeah.
All right, let's do this.
All right. So Joda, as an organizational leader or department head, I've had to unfortunately deal with multiple employees passing away over the years, and it's always a shock. It's a sad situation, and there's a lot of different things that go into that situation because it's a very delicate situation when an employee or a colleague passes away, and especially if you're in a leadership position, because people are looking to you to help manage the situation, and there's family members who are going to be looking towards you because they're going through a grieving process, and the employee obviously had a relationship, an important relationship with the institution or the organization in which they worked. So that's an important point to keep in mind. And then the staff also have relationships with the person who's passed away, and they have grieving and emotional things to work through as well when something like this happens. So, it's not something they teach a class on. If you go get your MBA or your degree in nonprofit management or higher education leadership, there's no class, managing death 101. It's not there. So, I know, based on my experience, I've got just a few pieces of advice I could think of to share with people if they're in a situation where they have an employee who's passed away and they need to navigate those treacherous waters or
Yeah.
somber waters.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think if we've been around for a while, we've experienced that. I don't know. I mean, for some people, probably depending on the job, maybe more often than others. And it's interesting because I'm wondering, like in the past, if that was even within the realm of an organization, to even kind of give a shit. I mean, 20, 100 years ago, when my grandmother was born,
Yeah, yeah,
there
yeah.
were organizations like even, someone died, on the conveyor belt. I mean, unfortunately, under certain circumstances, it was literally, brushed under the table to some degree, and we
Well, I
expect a
think,
lot. No, I was going to say we
yeah.
expect a lot more from our organizations today, and I not only are we expecting, I think to some degree they're even imposing is not the right word. There's been a development of kind of seeing your organization as an extended family. They've at least in the product development world that I've been in for software, there's sort of like that sort of, hey, we're a group. You don't ever have to leave the office. Here's a bunch of snacks. We care about you. We're thinking about the bigger picture of you from a holistic perspective. So this death question, it's interesting. It doesn't come up more to some degree, right? Because of the nature of the way business is sort of conducting itself now.
Yeah, well, I think, like I said, I work in higher education, as you know, and that's a lot. A lot of that's about building community, and especially I work at a community college, so that's definitely about building community, and so we have that same metaphor around the organization being kind of like a family. I don't know if I agree with that. I think there's some dangers in that, but I think
Oh
that's for
yeah.
a different podcast for
No,
sure.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, there are
And I,
dangers
I
for
can't
sure.
speak to the past, but I definitely feel in the present there is that expectation that the organization or the supervisor is or the leader of a organizational unit is going to participate in helping with the grieving process, and I think that comes from both the family and the people within the organization. So, and I will just, I'll chunk this out. So there's the family part. And I guess it really depends on how deeply the person in the organization, the person who passed, how deeply they connected with the organization. Because, if they're only there a few months, it's going to be one thing. But if they were there for many years, that's a whole different story because they have deeper relationships. They had a deeper commitment, and their identity was more deeply connected with the organization. And Joda, we've talked a lot about how people spend almost 70% of their lives at the workplace, so it does become deeply entrenched in their identity and how they see themselves, and how they construct meaning about their lives. So I think that makes sense. And the one piece of advice I would maybe even just a warning to folks, if you're dealing with something like this, you're going to be exposed to things from the family, because the family will ask you to participate, and you're going to learn things about your employees that might shock you, because there's the persona that they bring to the workplace, but then there's the family dynamics that they might not have been bringing to the workplace that you're going to learn about. And it's, in some ways, I have been shocked about some of those family dynamics. It's been surprising at times. I don't want to get into details here, but
No, please
it,
tell more.
yeah, no, I mean, sometimes it's very sad. I mean, I will say I had one employee who passed away. Unfortunate, she lived alone and she was by herself. She didn't have strong ties to her family. And then when I talked to her family after her passing to kind of sort out some things, I learned about why that was, some of the stressors in her familiar relationships. And when I learned some things about her past, it made a lot of other behaviors that she had expressed over the years click into place. So you get some of the exposition about who a person is when something like this happens, which is interesting. But again, I've been asked to speak at funerals and things like that for staff members, and you want to take some time to think about the good things they did, the positive things, the things they contributed to the organization. You also want to think about stories that will connect everybody to that person, because the person, we all have shared experiences with people and how they behave and how, their quirks and their characteristics, and you want to highlight the unique things about the person in a positive way when you're speaking about them. And I think it's also important as an organizational leader to create space for the grieving and the storytelling that needs to happen after a person has died, because people need that. And I think how you as a leader demonstrate the care with which you approach the situation signals to everybody else in your unit that you're leading how you really feel about them, right? Because if they see you dismissing somebody and just kind of walking away after someone's passed, they're gonna say, well, damn, Dan doesn't really give two whacks about me, right? Or anybody. So you really do need to demonstrate. It's kind of that leadership walking the walk, right? You want to show that people are valued and that you care about them and that there's purpose to the work that they're contributing to your organization.
Yeah.
Those would be some of my thoughts on that topic.
Yeah. 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 And, people handle death differently, and I think it's important that that one acknowledges that probably in general and of course around you. And from an organizational perspective, a death there's the human side of the experience that Dan, you're kind of highlighting, where you want to be considerate and caring, and that's sort of slightly anathema to, again, from a classic organizational system, that its bottom line is probably has nothing to do with necessarily you contending with someone's death, but where organizations are run by people. And so I think there are some things that in an organization that you should sort of consider when someone dies in a structure. And one of them would be to be aware of each other when someone dies, whether the person has been with the company for a day or a year or 20 years. Again, everybody handles it differently. We'll talk about more about how people handle death, I think, in a little bit, but to understand that. So just be aware of each other and be considerate and check in on people. And then the second thing would be to accept that work may be affected from a manager perspective, right? I mean,
Oh yeah.
the work's going to be kind of affected, and be willing to accept that a little bit. To Dan's point, you've definitely got to contact the deceased family if they die on premises.
That goes without saying.
Yeah. Well, who knows, right? Again, I mean, back in 1920, I'm sure a body just kind of disappeared sometimes, and it was like, "Where's Bill? I don't know. He was on the," and then Dan, as a leader, you often need to attend or organize a memorial service, and it might be separate from the one that the family's holding. But internally, you might have to do some
Oh yeah.
remembrance to people, because if you don't do that, and like I said, if you are, let's just say that you are evil and you don't have a soul and don't have a heart, do it anyways, because you need to at least let the people grieve. Let them know. If you don't, at least let them think that you care. You can definitely start to lose people's uh,
Enthusiasm,
enthusiasm
right?
about the company and about you as a leader. So
Yeah.
I'm hoping you have a heart, but those are kind of some things to think about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think to that point, the memorial service is important in having that space, even at the workplace, that's separate from the family, and to attend the funeral if you can. And sometimes again, the family, if the person had a really deep connection to the organization, it was very meaningful to them, which can happen in the nonprofit sector because people aren't motivated just by money to be working in education in a nonprofit. There's kind of a spiritual, personal mission for them often. And so there's a much deeper connection than, say, if somebody's working at, I hate to use this as an example, but working at 7-Eleven, right? We're working as a cashier. That still might be very meaningful to them, but it's probably not the same as if somebody's working with the homeless or um, teaching people or tutoring folks and stuff like that. Um, so, and I think the other point is, besides the memorial and making that space and giving people a chance to share stories and listen, um, also recognizing that that person, if they've been around long enough, they become, even they are immortalized in a way within the organization, at least for a time after their passing, because they're going to become part of the folklore of the organization, right? People still reference them later, and what they've done, and this is how this person did it, and oh boy, I missed that. It is always amazing to me, even because as a manager, I'm often the primary place where complaints land. And so after you pass away, people, like, the things that you did that annoyed them, it becomes like this humorous characteristic after you've passed away, right? It's an interesting phenomena to see that change, and the way they talk about, people talk about people who've passed is very different than when than when they're alive sometimes.
That's right. And again, I mean, it's very yes, that's yes, and back to the sort of resource allotment, or the mechanics of operations due to the death. You need to, with care and understanding, you need to what was that? You need to understand that you're going to have to be moving some things around, probably, and this won't be easy. And you're going to be asking people to fill in the shoes, probably, of this person who died in one way or another. Pick up a
Oh yeah.
job, pick up a project that they were working on, and
Occupy their desk.
that's gonna add some anxiety, a little bit of shock, some
It could.
confusion. It could. I mean, some people might be willing. I didn't like that person anyways. Good riddance.
Yeah.
Yes, I finally
Or
got my
they didn't
office.
know them. Or they
Yeah,
didn't know them and
or
they're
they didn't
coming
know
in
them. That's
cold,
right. That's right.
you
That's right.
know?
So it depends. But my point being is, all I'm saying is, as a leader, you need to be sensitive to that. Or if not a
Yeah.
leader, just one of the coworkers, be sensitive to these scenarios, and eventually you all will get through it. I mean, obviously we always do. You get on with getting on. So yeah.
Yeah. It's always a sad experience, but it is something that probably will happen to you as a leader if you're if you're in a management or leadership position long enough. Someone's bound to pass away, and uh, there are resources to help you. Definitely consult with HR, on how you should handle it, and above all, just be empathetic and listen and create space for the grieving process to happen. And there is a reason why we are impacted by death, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next section of the podcast, where we're going to tackle terror management theory. So, Joda, when I mention terror management theory, what do you think of?
Um, Terror management theory. Think of a very cruel manager who likes and gets off on creating horror for his or her
Kind of
employees.
like a grim, masochistic, torturous
Yeah, what the hell
guy
is
in a black suit and
terror? Sounds like a movie. Terror management coming to a theater near you. It's a
yeah, well, it's kind of a misleading name, unfortunately, because it's not really, it has nothing to do with management. It has nothing to do with organizational leadership or business or nonprofit management or anything like that. It's really about managing your own existential terror. And Joda and I have a lot of experience managing our existential terror. I'm managing it all the time. Um, so
yes.
that's what it's really about. So, I mean, it comes from, it's based off the writings of an anthropologist by the name of Ernest Becker. He wrote a couple books before he died prematurely. He died pretty young, but he wrote a book called the Denial of Death and the Birth and Death of Meaning, and maybe some others, where he kind of encapsulates his theory about what would become terror management theory, because his ideas were kind of more theoretical in nature, and then some social psychological scientists kind of got a hold of it and developed TMT through what terror management theory, often called TMT, through some empirical experiments that have really proven very interesting, and uh, it's a legitimate theory about our existential terror.
Existential terror of dread. Okay, and what's yes, we have fear of dying. A lot of us, some more
Yep.
than others. I think that's a given. We didn't need him to tell us that. It affects the way we make our decisions. I don't think we need him to tell us that. What's new here?
Well, I think what always intrigues me about it, and it's actually one of the reasons I teach it sometimes, is it is deeply connected to our concept of culture. That he kind of provides a nice framework, and terror management theory provides a nice framework for how death helps us generate culture. And culture, we can both come up with some examples of culture, right? Stories and traditions and
It's the way that
s-
that a group of animals collectively create themes, essentially, about their existence, and
yeah, and through activities and
yeah,
symbols and narratives and all those different things, flags and whatever it might be that contribute to your sense of belonging
yeah,
to a tribe or a group of people. The terrible towel if you're a Pittsburgh Steelers fan,
yeah.
waving that around.
Yeah.
So that's kind of culture. And Becker's basically saying, and the terror management theory folks by extension are basically saying that we get our self-esteem from our culture. It gives us a sense of value and belonging to this place in the world that we exist in. So it's not all meaningless, and that when our mortality, what they call our mortality salience, is raised. And mortality salience is kind of like, how aware am I at any given moment of the fact that I'm going to die? It's like most of us don't go around thinking of it at the forefront of our consciousness on a day-to-day basis, but it's there. And so that's where they get this concept of salience, mortality salience, and it kind of goes up and down. And so if you raise somebody's mortality salience, the theory argues that they're going to behave in, they're going to really engage with their culture and the things that the culture says are positive things, right? That the culture agrees with, right? So, for instance, there's a study that they did with some judges where they gave judges some a control group and another group of judges, and they gave them a questionnaire designed, and one in the control group it was kind of you know general, but in the experimental group they had questions or statements that raised people's mortality salience and raised forced them to think about their own limited existence. And then they asked them a hypothetical question, like, so about a court case in which there was a prostitute, and how would you sentence her under these certain set of conditions. And the experimental group uh, gave the prostitute a harsher sentence than the control group. And the idea being because prostitution is a transgressive activity, culturally speaking, for most people, that the judges doubled down on those cultural norms. And so the theory kind of goes along with that you become more deeply connected and committed to your culture. There's even studies around 9/11 and stuff like that explore why patriotism rose after 9/11 and things like that. And there's lots of stuff about, other more contemporary things related to it as well.
Interesting. It seems a little give me a hammer, everything's a nail kind of a bit.
Oh yeah, it could be.
I'm
It
always
could be.
very suspicious of these sort of reductive theories but I'm still not getting the connection here exactly. So, how does this tie to an organization?
Well, I think from an organization, I think it's a useful framework for managers to think about in terms of thinking about their employees, right? And especially in the context of self-esteem, right? That's one of the pieces that the culture of the organization helps give the employees their self-esteem and their sense of self-worth and their sense of belonging. And so it's important to cultivate that within your culture. And we talk about cultural change within organizations all the time. Like, we need to make cultural change, but you have to really understand what culture is and how it's impacting the employees. And the culture is ultimately impacting the employees by giving them a sense of belonging and purpose and meaning to their lives.
So, a manager should regularly remind people that they're going to die so that they can be more
No,
engaged in
no, I don't think that. You better come to work, otherwise you're going to die.
You're gonna die one day, Dr. Dan, and you're gonna die, and you're gonna
And
totally
I'm going to tell everyone you are late for work every day. No, yeah, but you want to recognize that in the back of your mind. Like, okay, just be respectful that this person, this job for many people is very important to them, and that's where they get a sense of purpose to their lives. And it's not superficial. That there can be some depth to the connection somebody has with their work.
So this is my translation, and pardon me for being dense here a little bit, but this is my translation, and obviously I probably should read this Dr. Ernest Becker. But
Well, I mean,
my translation is this so far, that understanding your mortality adds a level of criticality to the finite moment that you have in this existence, and that it makes you invest yourself more into the world around you because of the recognition that it's going to end. And so you're going to put more energy into being, because who knows when it's going to stop. And that when at work, that because as we had a previous discussion around meaning and should organizations provide meaning or be part of the meaning structure, I think we kind of slightly agreed that on both, that as a manager, a leader, that you need to acknowledge that when your workers come to work, it's fulfilling part of the meaning in their life, and that you need
exactly.
to relate to that, because that meaning is derived from the fact that they're afraid they're going to die one day. No, just kidding. But the fact that that because it's driven by this ultimate sense that of needing to have a purpose, because in the end nothing has meaning. I don't know. It's something. I don't know. That's kind of where my
Well, I mean, why do we name buildings after people? I mean, or why do we put up statues for people or name a classroom after somebody? Right? It has to do with that sense of symbolic immortality that
narratives.
people are striving for.
Yeah.
I
guess I just don't understand how it necessarily has to tie back to death. But I guess I'm not getting the death connection here exactly. I mean, other than that, at this very moment, but other than that, it is a driving force that makes humans really think about their meaning on this planet, really, and that by jumping onto a culture, that it helps fulfill that meaning. It's the narration that drives that meaning. If you didn't have that, then it's the language by which we construct our meaning, and so that's super important. And managers and leaders need to know that. But fundamentally, it's derived from this sort of sense of mortality.
Right. And that the more people are going back to our previous conversation about how different people react to the passing of a colleague or whatever, that can have an impact on their behavior, right?
Yeah.
So, because their mortality, their self awareness of their own mortality is raised.
Yeah.
And so it's not just about the loss of the employee or the person in their lives, it's also that they're confronting their own existential situation as well. And I think that brings us to, there's a lot of other things you could talk about with in terms of terror management theory that we're not going to talk about on this episode, and we could go deeper into it maybe on another episode. But tribalism and how it can contribute to some negative things too. It can be, obviously it can be a binding agent that pulls a group together, but it can also contribute to the idea of in groups and out groups and stuff like that.
Sure.
So, which we can talk about in a different episode, but it's something to be aware of. But I think for our conversation today on this episode, it's important to remember that. So it's important to remember that that from an organizational perspective, that organizations change, and so we talk about cultural change, we talk about reorganization, we talk about organizational structures that have to be shifted and programs that have to be cut and stuff like that. Those are deaths too, right? It might not be an individual passing away, but if you think about the organizational culture and what the organization is to a person, means to a person, and their role in that organization, then there's a that I can see how terror management theory can inform how you perceive organizational change and the disruptions that can happen when you end a department or have to end a program.
Uh, yeah, Dan. Yeah, that's interesting because I think organizations have a tendency to ignore this ending phase. I mean, organizations revolve. I mean, their purpose is to create, right? Not to disband, not to kind of end. And
Self-perpetuating, right?
yeah, self-perpetuating, and I think it's important for organizations for a thriving organization to be able to continue to move forward. I think it's important for them to know when to let things go. And I actually think that's one of the reasons that corrupt is developed. I've worked for very large organizations, and at some point in time, they become so big that they can't actually produce anything anymore. They end up having to purchase companies that produce stuff, and then they kind of become like these holding companies. And there's lots of companies that are in that state. And I think one of the reasons is because they don't know how to actually close things. They don't know how to end things, and there's a lot of reasons for that, which we don't need us to go into. But they definitely.
Well, I think we've talked about them actually. I mean, I think that terror management theory, we've already said that sense of grief and loss can contribute to that resistance to ending something that should be ended.
Yeah, but I think there's also business, fiduciary, fiscal reasons why things don't close
Yeah.
out
Oh,
as
yeah.
well. There's legal reasons why things don't end. There's a bunch of reasons, right?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That
For
things just
sure.
will continue on. But with that said, like you said, I mean, things can close out, and like death in the family, you can have this kind of very similar relationship to the something ending that you've invested your time, your energy, your blood, your sweat, from a company's perspective, your dollars. It's tough to let go. You put so much into it, and you can have those same, and under certain circumstances, those same exact sorts of feelings, those denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance process. And I think most of us probably kind of get through part of that, and then just kind of the acceptance part, I think oftentimes is the hardest, and most people actually don't get through that in an organization. I think people just kind of live with it.
Yeah, and they quit or they
Yeah, you're
sit around
on it.
bitter, they quiet quit.
Yeah,
And
exactly, right? And so you there is a weird parallel to life and death with the organization. And it's important that eventually you can get past that, and you accept that, and you just kind of are able to move forward. But how do
Mhm.
you do that? Right? I mean, how do you do that? And as we mentioned, organizations do have their own life expectancies. Projects do have their own life expectancies. One thing I'd like to bring up real quick is that this whole life expectancy thing, or death, unlike humans where we don't really have zombies, there are zombie projects that probably should be considered dead, right? But are still continue. I don't know. I mean, in my experience, I've
I would
experienced
say
that.
there's zombie organizations out there, right?
Yeah,
You know, I mean, I think you see it in COVID, right? I think of, not just on the programmatic level, but like department stores and Sears and J.C. Penney's that were kind of limping to their end, and COVID just changed the conditions of the environment to speed up their demise. Um, and I see it in higher. I feel like as someone who works in higher education, we're constantly wrestling with how to shut programs down because I feel like we're always in a cycle of death and rebirth in higher education. Like we're cutting programs, we're creating new ones, responding to the environment because a lot of sometimes it has nothing to do with the people involved that causes a program or project or institution to become a zombie. It has to do with the environment's just changed and they haven't been able to adapt or whatever they haven't been able to adapt to the changing environment and it's no longer sustainable.
yeah. Like there's a momentum behind it. That momentum is what's keeping it going, but it doesn't align. And a writer for project manager websites, her name Jennifer Bridges. She has some. I'll list off what she wrote here. She has some stuff that she says are sort of indicators or signs of zombie projects, right? Ones that should probably
Ooh,
they're done.
this is perfect for Halloween.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. So one is when it no longer meets the project needs, such as the original purpose or the project has changed and it can't be met, right? So it's kind of doing its thing, but it's not actually producing what it was supposed to be doing anymore. But yet again, it's employing people kind of going through the ritual of continuing going. The costs are out of control, right? And
Oh
there's no
yeah.
way to recoup the return on the investment, right? And no need for that project to continue to go on. The cost to compete or the cost to complete exceeds the budget and is impossible to cover the difference in the cost. So again, there's a cost constituency there. The circumstances affect the possibility of completion, such as those listed above. There are ethical and or legal issues. I think you were kind of bringing that up. And then I added one to the list when the project no longer aligns with the business goals, which I think is exactly what you were just talking about. When there's the organization has moved a different direction or has made changes, and that project just doesn't map to or align with that anymore. And again, that could go on forever, and that becomes waste. And it's you got to recognize that sooner rather than
Well,
later.
I would say, I mean, and also the environment and the culture has changed around, again, I come from a higher ed background, so I'm thinking of educational programs and how the needs change and how, in a open system environment like a college or university is like new laws can change the need for a program. Like, so for instance, I'm thinking early childhood education in Seattle. That's a booming program, but that's because laws were passed that required people to get a degree
Yeah,
in that in order to be
yeah,
able to do that. And so that's a very clear legal thing that says, okay, you got to do this to get your credential to work. Um, Whereas I'm thinking of, I'm fortunate I have to go back to the arts and humanities, right? Culturally, that is not as appealing and incentivized in the political arena and the economic arena as much. So you see those programs really withering on the vine, as it were, which is sad because they are important programs.
yeah, yeah. And it's tough. And like I said, I just listed off some reasons why zombie projects should close out. The signals to get that are not always easy. You can kind of internalize it, but some signals to look for a zombie project would be the leadership begins to not show up for critical meetings, right? It means it's not really important for them anymore. Resources begin to dwindle or not easily replaced. You're not able to kind of collect the resources, whether that's money or people or things like that. And peer collaboration becomes increasingly difficult, right? Meaning that it's just
But
not
how
on.
much of that is the leadership and the people involved
It's not
versus
it's not saying that that's it's as those are signals. That's not saying that those are it's correlation necessarily causation. It's a signal to say it's the fact that that's what's happening.
right? So
There's a
it's something to look for
look
because
for.
maybe those people involved in the program see the writing on the wall and are, as they say now, quiet kidding.
Yeah,
quitting,
and there
as
could
the
be
kids say, quiet quitting.
those three signals could be indicative of something else too, not of that. I'm
Yeah.
just saying those are just something to think about if you're looking at it. And to your point, all those three signals might mean to you is that you have to work a little harder to make sure that project succeeds. So it doesn't mean quit necessarily. That's just those are three signals that potentially you have a zombie project. So you've got your zombie's dead. You realize it's a dead project. It's over. Whether because it's successful, it finished, and you don't need to do it anymore, or it's not doing anything. It's not doing what it needed to do, right? And you put it out to pasture. So, like the human world, when people pass away, there's this process of having to sort of pull things together and getting on with your life, and you end up having to sort of manage this person, the dead person's assets, and stuff like that. And so it's very similar with a project. So projects are, I mean, and so when you have a project and when you've deemed it to be finished or closed out or dead, then there are several stages that you have to think about. There's several things, and I'll rattle those off. And I got this list from the Asana website. I liked it. It kind of aligned with the sort of the list I was thinking about. So I just took it from there. And Asana is a project management application. And I want to be clear, they have not reached out to us for anything. I just discovered this on my own.
Oh,
So
that's what he says. He's
yeah.
pocketing the money and not sharing it with me.
Sorry, Dan.
Thanks,
Uh,
Jodah.
so there's 8. So basically, perform a final test, wrap up loose ends, complete administrative tasks, notify team about next steps, update stakeholders and send a final report, hold a project postmortem, and create a roadmap for improvements and celebrate. So I'm going to run through these, Dan, briefly, but I'm going to kind of stick on the ones that are most important for me, and then
Yeah, there's a couple on there that list that I want to speak to as well.
Okay, so what do you think about perform final? So let me qualify perform final test. Perform final test is sort of like you're checking to see, like, if you're ending it, has it done what it's supposed to do? Right. And so it goes back to, this is kind of like that checking if it's a zombie thing, right? Can you satisfactorily say it has solved or done what it's supposed to do? Has it captured the state of the project? So it's just kind of doing that final litmus test of what its state is, right? So
Yeah. So I could think of, for instance, now I'm sure a lot of organizations are shutting down their COVID response programs in their organizations because the environment's changed and that project no longer needs to continue, right? Laws are changing and restrictions are being lightened up, so there's no longer a need to have those conversations as much. So
yeah.
you're starting to see that wind down. So that's
Yeah.
a very clear, the signal's there, right? It doesn't need to continue.
Yeah, and we can argue as we don't want it to be dismissive. That's kind of a critical one in some regards, because that's the one that gets missed, and then you end up having that project that goes on forever, or you're not wrapping up correctly, or you're not starting this sort of closure process. So it's important to start that one off. But the next one is wrap up loose ends, and that is sort of typified by, are there any outstanding efforts that need to be dealt with? There could be sort of things like a class is in progress. You're closing the project, but the class has got to end through the semester, or there's
We
a
call it
project.
teaching out.
Is it called teaching out? Okay, yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
if you shut down a academic program and you still have students in the program, you want to try and set it up so you can teach them out so that they can complete. So
Yeah, so that's step 2. Wrap. Make sure that you've got that and you figured out how you're going to handle that. The third one is complete administrative tasks. That's the one that really aligns a lot with the death of a family, right? I mean, this is the one where you're going to move assets. You're going to check out, how are you going to sell the home,
cancel credit cards,
things like that, right? And that's a very similar thing for.
Make sure you write yourself into the will.
You do. You got to find a nefarious lawyer and make sure all assets go to you.
Exactly.
So you want to make sure the project files and assets, whatever, are distributed correctly, updates to documentation, make sure project documents are signed, close out contracts, things like that, right? It's a completely not fun part. Everybody wants to ignore it, especially, because you just want to move on to the next project. And this just feels like, actually, this dead project won't be finished.
Yeah, no, imagine it takes a lot of effort to get that stuff done because it's the boring, unglamorous, thankless crap that you gotta clear off the desk so you can start the next thing.
Exactly. And and this is the point where you actually make sure your team members are assigned to new projects. You don't do that, then they're going to be like, what do we do? We're on this, where are we supposed to go? And you might not have, team members that kind of are proactive, and they're going to just actually be resentful that this project's closed and they have no idea what to do next. And again, you're going to lose somebody probably if you don't take care of that.
Oh
So
yeah, yeah.
so that's any other, that's the complete administrative tasks. Any, I'm sure you've
No, I have nothing else to say about that. I mean, my programs don't close.
Oh, that's right. That's right. You're an epitome of pure success, nonstop. That's right. No, we've discussed this. Dan is perfect, everybody. And then
That's right. That's right.
number
No,
4,
not at all.
notify.
Talk to my wife.
Oh, yeah, it's perfection. Perfection from non-perfection is what she would say. But notify teams about next steps. That's stage 4. So basically,
Yeah,
you want
communication's always important.
exactly. You want to make
That's I think with communication, that's where all the gossip and the conspiracy theories and the misunderstandings get perpetuated. Because if you do not communicate, and we'll say this again and again during this podcast series, if you do not communicate, people will fill the void with their own stories,
that's
and
right.
that can cause all kinds of mayhem in your organization.
That's
Because
right.
nothing spreads faster than a rumor.
That's right. That can generate a culture that you don't want to that you don't want to have created. So,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure. 5 is update stakeholders and send final reports, and that's not unlike step 3 to some degree. But basically, this is letting your leadership know about the closure, what they can expect, what they can anticipate, what potentially your game plan might be. Um,
Document.
Document, yep, and feedback from them. You want to get information
Yeah.
from them. But this is a stakeholder conversation. 6 is hold a project post-mortem meeting. And maybe
Yes.
I'm assuming this is the one that you're because interested in. This is what I'm interested in. I have a feeling this one gets short shrift. What do you think? Typically,
Oh, it always gets short shifted, right? Or
yeah,
shrifted, or whatever that word is.
yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think I always kind of approach things from a metacognitive learning perspective, and in the metacognitive learning cycle, evaluation is key, right? It's the end of the learning process, and to me, this is about organizational learning. In our last episode, we talked about sense-making organizations, but a sense-making organization is also kind of a learning organization, and if you're not setting up systems to learn from what you've done well and what you've not done so well at, you're not going to be able to grow and adapt as an organization. So, yeah, I think that taking the time to do the evaluation and post-mortem is key.
agreed. And you said everything I would have said, so we will leave it at that. But yeah, so don't not do the post-mortem. Always be looking back to see where you're going to go forward to some degree. So 7 is create a roadmap for improvements. It's not unlike, it's basically after you've done your post-mortem, now you know where to go. You've got your information, and so you're going to leverage that data to move forward. And so that's 7, is to kind of figure out what's the next thing you're going to do. And again, this goes back to communication to your employees and your leadership and your stakeholders. They're going to want to know this. And this is something, obviously this can change, but that's what this phase is for. And that's phase 7.
Mm-hmm.
And then phase 8 is celebrate. Yes, celebrate.
Yeah, probably another one that is shortchanged.
Yeah. Agreed.
Because usually, especially if it's felt like the project was a failure or didn't go somewhere, then you don't want to celebrate. You want to kind of but you should have a wake for it. And I think, you can reframe that, again, going back to that metacognitive evaluation and thinking about what went right and what went wrong and what you can learn from, and where are there opportunities based on what you've learned. You can turn that into a celebration. Like it's like I used to tell my kid when he was growing up. It's like the only definition of failure is not learning from what your experience has been, right? You can fail at all, in your mind, fail at all kinds of different things. But if you've taken some wisdom from what happened and learned from it and can make changes based on it, then it actually wasn't a failure. It was just a learning experience.
Yeah. No, exactly. And that was one of the notes I put there. As long as you've collected data, As long as you are able to look at that data, there's no such thing as failure. You're like you said, it's just data information, and you're moving forward. If you're not collecting data, then that was your failure. Was not
Yeah.
collecting the data. That's where you failed. So
And that's something to learn from too.
that's something learn from
Collect that
too.
data.
Collect that
As we
data.
said in another episode again, always be collecting data.
Always be collecting data. So yeah, and I think the celebration thing is about bonding, about relationships. It's the area, it's a place where the team can commiserate or celebrate. All that super, because that's the part where you get to be human. And let's be honest, Dan, you don't really know somebody truly until you see them drunk out of their mind, and then you know them in the deepest way possible. So,
Guess I don't know you then, Jodah.
oh, we need to
No,
do
I
some
know him too well.
we need to do some
Too well.
drinking, I think. Then,
Know him
so
too well.
yes, always celebrate. Take any chance you can to celebrate. Life is short. Terror theory.
Yeah. Hey, man, terror management theory keeps me drinking.
And that's it. That's how you handle closure in organization around your projects. Obviously not a deep dive, just a whirlwind for this death episode of Sense and Signal.
But we do have a couple of takeaways, good takeaways that I just want to highlight. Just be empathetic when people are going through dealing with the death of a colleague or employee and are dealing with organization. Be empathetic. Number two, recognize that their identity and self-esteem are often tied to the organization or the project, and that can contribute to the grieving process that they are going through. Number three, you might make sure to wrap things up. Once something ends, it's just like when a person passes away, you have to deal with all the business side of it too, with the canceling of insurance and credit cards and doing the will and being executive of the state. Get that done and close out the project. And finally, create space. And it could be either space for grieving or space for celebration, or like a wake, a little bit of both. But create space for people to get together and make meaning of what happened and to process what they have gone through together. So that is our episode of Sense and Signal, the death episode. And make sure to like us or subscribe to us or follow us, depending on what platform you are on.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. And we will see you next week. Bye.
It's not Halloween yet, Jodah.
Okay. I'm still here.